1 minute countdown to the start of the webinar. 1 minute to go. Com check. Ron, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mike. Can you hear me?
I can. Bill, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, let's go ahead and get the webinar started. First thing I'm going to do is do a screen check. Ron, are you able to see my screen?
I believe I do see it here. That's the Defending Your Homeland.
Correct. And Bill, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Very good. Okay, welcome to today's webinar, Defending Your Homeland, how to defend your home, business, school, church, or community during a civil disturbance. My name is Mike Smock. I am Vice President of Business Development for Pulse. I'll be your host and your MC today. Two of my Pulse colleagues are joining me. Ron Danielowski, who is the Vice President and Chief Instructor, is also on the webinar, along with Bill Talent, who is Vice President of Tactical Operations. You can find detailed resumes on all of us on the website, along with obviously additional information about Pulse, and that website is www.pulsefirearmstraining.com. The webinar today is scheduled for 1 hour. We will have about 50 minutes of content, after which we will throw it open to questions. To ask a question during the webinar, please use the question submittal link at the bottom of your control panel down here. And there is a question panel there. Please feel free to ask questions during the presentation. We will be monitoring it. If we can get to it, we will try to answer it during the presentation, and if not, we will certainly do so at the end. Also, at the end of the webinar, we will open it up for a Q&A, so everybody can ask questions. You can also hold your questions to that time if you like, and again, those questions you'll need to input into the question box there. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with notes and instructions on how to access the PDF or the webinar broadcast, which will be recorded, along with various PDF downloads that are part of the webinar and other information that you will probably find of interest. There is in the chat box down here, there is a link that you can hit any time during the webinar that will take you to a sign-up page for the O2DA Defense Academy. Inside the O2DA Defense Academy is where you will find the PDFs, the handouts, and all the webinar replays. So in order to get signed up for that, you'll need to hit that link below. You get a 14-day free trial. And there's no credit card required to do that. Now, I'll come back to that again towards the end of the webinar. So let's dive right into it. The format that we have is a series of webinars that are being presented each Thursday over the next 9 weeks, leading up to the RNC convention in Cleveland. Each week, we have selected a topic from our strategy manual, which is one of the PDF downloads that you will receive when you get inside of the O2DA Defense Academy. a topic that relates to what we see as the current threats that are on the horizon for folks here in America. With that topic selected, and again, there's a different topic for each week, we then discuss a historical example that illustrates that topic. And then we set up a hypothetical scenario based upon current events that starts to apply the topic and the historical event into real life and starts to look at it from the standpoint of threats that we may all face. And then last, we will get into the skill sets necessary to defend against that hypothetical scenario. So each week there will be a different topic along with a different scenario and a different set of skills. Looks like we are not seeing the screen. Let me come back here and Ron, can you confirm that you see my screen now?
I can see it now, yeah.
And you should be at webinar format, correct?
Yes, webinar format.
Okay, we're back on track here. Okay, so I just got done describing the webinar format. The agenda that we're going to follow each week in doing that, we'll start off with introductions, which we've in the process of completing. We'll then go into the weekly topic. We'll talk about the historical event. We will go through a hypothetical scenario, and then we'll describe the applicable skills. We'll close it out and then have Q&A at the end. Again, about 1 hour in order to get all that accomplished. Before we do that, I do want to tell you a little bit about Pulse and who we are, because it definitely flavors the information that you're about to receive. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. You can find all kinds of information about us at our website, and I will leave you to your own devices to do that. But I do want to offer the following. We offer combative firearms instruction. We train individuals, teams, and units to defend life and property. The solutions and ideas and concepts that we will be presenting today begin at the moment that a threat materializes. We do not do de-escalation training. We don't provide electronic surveillance. We don't do passive threat assessments. We train you and your team to eliminate the threat. Our instruction is delivered through a fully integrated set of courses, programs, manuals, videos, photos, and other training resources. Our online O2DA Defense Academy is the hub for all of our training resources. It backs up our range training, our reality-based training. And as I've indicated, I think if you get in there and take a look at it, you'll see that there's quite a bit of value to be found in the Defense Academy. Everything that Bill and Ron talk about, who I'm about to hand things over to, can be found inside of the Defense Academy. Not just the handouts and the briefs, but also all the detail from the standpoint of our manuals, videos, and other training resources. So with this, I am now going to turn it over to Bill. Bill this week will be talking about the new threat and response paradigm. Last week we talked about the new normal in personal and collective security. You can find that webinar along with the handouts inside of the Defense Academy. And this week with the new topic, I will now hand it off to Bill Talent, Vice President of Tactical Operations for Pulse. And with that, I'm going to hand over control of the keyboard to you, Bill. And you should be good to go.
But welcome everyone listening. All right, this week I'm going to talk through this topic of the threat and response paradigm. You'll find this discussion developed in a little bit more detail when you log in and find our presentation on this. But I'm going to hit on the key points here. As soon as, here we are. Let me start with this. You may or may not be familiar with the source of the quote, "Know your enemy and know yourself. Your victory will never be endangered." But of course that comes from Sun Tzu's Art of War. going on 3,500, 3,600 years old now. And we start here when we talk about threats because we feel like the most effective and efficient way for you to consider threats is to start by knowing yourself. And by that we mean that you need to identify the place and the people you seek to protect. And in that way you characterize yourself as a target or a target set from the perspective of your potential adversary. If you don't do that first, you're going to spin your wheels and waste a great deal of time and energy. Having identified those that you seek to protect, then you enter into the evaluation of threats. To know your enemy means that you use your knowledge of your own vulnerabilities and exposure to narrow your consideration of the otherwise overwhelming array of potential threats. Reason being that if you do not narrow that spectrum, you're going to squander time, energy, and resources preparing for threats that are very unlikely to occur or would have very insignificant consequences if they did. So we try to define threats by looking at a broad spectrum and then very quickly narrow down on the threats that may affect you or impact you directly. And you see here at the bottom of the slide is yet another quote from my friend Sun Tzu, who says that when the enemy prepares everywhere, he will be weak everywhere. None of us have the time, the personnel, the resources, the capability to train and prepare for every potential threat. We have to focus on the ones we are most likely to meet. This is a generic threat spectrum that we at Pulse like to recommend as a starting point for your considerations. This is neither a complete list nor is it necessarily accurate or complete in its components. You would use this as a starting point. You would use these to adapt to your particular needs and situation. Now I won't read all the way through this slide. I hate reading slides, but you can see the breakdown here, beginning with criminal acts, which is primarily acts committed by individuals, and then we look at organized crime. Organized crime gives us a wonderful example for how you have to develop and adapt these threat descriptions. If you were in the northeastern United States and considering organized crime as a potential threat, you would be looking at the traditional organized crime syndicates in large part. But if you're in the southwestern United States, organized crime is likely to refer more to drug cartels and trafficking organizations and street gangs. In your particular locale, in your particular situation, you would adapt and expand on this definition so that it applies directly to you. And then you have cause-driven intimidation, mob violence, which is what we looked at in last week's discussion and scenario, which was an example of violence that can erupt from protests and demonstrations, even those that start in a peaceful manner or whose organizers intend to keep them peaceful. This sort of mob violence is something that we're going to return to a couple more times in the course of these webinars. And then we look, of course, at terrorist attacks, which we define for our purposes in threat assessment as being organized group events driven by a cause with classic terrorist goals. And we distinguish those from the extremist attack, extremists being lone individuals, also motivated by political or religious views, who resort to violence, but do not, in today's context, have extensive resources backing them up. They do not have fully realized networks of logistic support and planning and finances. So it really does classically describe the lone jihadist, for instance, who may take violent action in pursuit of the same goal as organizations like ISIS or Al Qaeda, but he does it inspired by his views, but not necessarily controlled or supported by those organizations. That category certainly includes events like the Fort Hood shooting in 2009, which we're going to talk about more here in a minute. may include the San Bernardino event, which as more and more information comes to light, we find that that sort of straddles the line between self-radicalized and individual action and actions that are organized and planned by larger organizations. The Paris and Brussels attacks recently are clearly in the category of organized group cause-driven violence that we classify as terrorism. Now, our second theme in this discussion is that of decentralized response. Whatever the threat you identify, or series of threats that you identify as most relevant or most likely to affect you, when they materialize as a violent attack, what we find in modern America is that the likelihood of an effective centralized response, which is how we look at police response, is very, very unlikely in the first critical seconds or minutes. As we see again and again in the broad category of active shooter events, police typically arrive too late to resolve the situation. Lone active shooter events, regardless of their cause and motivation, are usually resolved before the first police officer is on the scene and ready to intervene. And what that means is that we're thrown largely upon our own resources if we in fact hope to defend ourselves against any of these attacks. The presence of well-armed, well-trained, self-disciplined citizens drastically increase the odds that attackers will either be defeated or at least delayed or disrupted before law enforcement personnel can arrive and intervene. And that's a key concept. We do not necessarily suggest that against very high order threats with multiple attackers and high degrees of planning and organization that an individual armed citizen is necessarily going to be able to defeat every one of those threats. But delay them, yes. Disrupt them, yes. And as we'll speak here in a second in greater detail, the very possibility of such a response will tend to deter those events from happening. And as you see, we're certainly very realistic about the limits on what any one individual can do. But and in that respect, we certainly encourage simpatico individuals, like-minded people, networks of people who share interests and concerns through business associations or church associations, schools or communities, to begin to work together and train together and lay at least a foundation of training so that, that they can cooperate in the event of a violent attack that will affect them or their people. The whole would be far more than the sum of its parts. But we will talk more today, both in our historical example and in our hypothetical scenario, about how even one prepared individual can make an enormous difference if he is able to recognize the threat and act promptly and effectively. It is, you know, as we say here, it's not a matter of being the hero. It's not a matter of having an exceptional level of courage. It is simply a matter of, on the day that this event occurs and involves you, you can either respond to it helplessly with hope, or you can respond with the resources of ability, training, and the physical skills necessary to give you some chance of survival and success. The deterrence piece is very much the soft piece. This is what logic tells us is very important, but we have very little concrete evidence to verify what our logic tells us. This is the reason why, I would suggest, we have not seen terrorist events of the nature of the Paris or Brussels or Mumbai attacks here in the United States. It is because in many locales across the United States that would be attractive targets for these sorts of enemies, the presence of armed individuals capable of defending themselves introduces a tremendous factor of uncertainty on the part of potential attackers. Attackers themselves in their planning process, whether it is an individual criminal, whether it's organized crime, gangs, politically driven organizations, lone extremists, terrorist organizations, they all have their own target selection process. They weigh potential targets and choose ones that give them the best promise of success. The classic example of that would be the Aurora theater shooter in Colorado, who, as we know, passed 4 other movie theaters showing the same movie at the same time and landed at the movie theater which prominently displayed signs forbidding patrons from bringing firearms into the theater. He chose his target, and he chose one that would give him a better promise of success than any of those other candidates. This is a really vital consideration, and you will never know what victories your presence and your readiness and your abilities at self-defense have won, because you will not see that feedback. You'll never know. But that capability is one that potential adversaries look at, and they will be deterred by that uncertainty or that mounting likelihood that there will be someone on hand capable and willing to defend themselves. And what happens then, sounds rather cold, but it's simple truth, is that those potential attackers then move on to what they see as an easier target. That is a victory. It's a bloodless victory. It's one that you can seldom identify or verify that it occurred, but it does occur, and it occurs all the time. And then the last piece of this argument is what we call, in America, gun-free zones. And we like to speak of them more accurately as unarmed victim zones. The location that is most vulnerable to every point on that large threat spectrum are those locations where, by law or by the decisions of private persons, forbid the possession of weapons in the hands of citizens. People and institutions that are incapable of self-defense, of decentralized response to a threat, are highly attractive targets. They allow any potential offender a strong likelihood that he will have minutes, critical minutes, in which to act out his own will before anyone can effectively intervene and interfere with him and stop him. Gun-free zones are not gun-free zones. Only the law-abiding can be counted on to leave their weapons outside. So if in fact your target set includes a gun-free zone, for instance, businesses which prohibit the presence of weapons, schools that are declared by the federal government as gun-free zones, then you must understand that that you are in a very potentially vulnerable target set, and that must color your approach to all of these questions. All right, now we're going to move on and take a quick look from these perspectives at a historical example. One is going to be somewhat familiar with, and of course that is the mass shooting at Fort Hood in 2009. Who was an Army psychiatrist. He killed 13, actually I should amend that number, it was 14 if you include the unborn child who was killed along with his mother in that shooting. So 14 fatalities, 30 wounded at the Soldier Readiness Reprocessing Center at Fort Hood. For the shooting, but we are going to Hassan had become radicalized over a period of years, during which his military comrades and other contacts failed to either recognize or report his trajectory. He readily admitted that he had changed sides and was motivated by his interpretation of Islam, and that he actively sought martyrdom. There were many, many indicators that this man constituted a growing threat to his fellow soldiers and the American public, but no one had the political or moral courage to report this and seek intervention. Hassan's planning, his procurement of weapons and training, and his target selection were all very disciplined and deliberate. These were not the actions of a madman or an irrational person. And finally, Hassan used an FN-57 pistol, which is routinely fed by a 20-round or an extended 30-round magazine. He fired almost 200 rounds inside and outside the clinic. And when he was finally shot and stopped, he had 177 more rounds loaded in magazines in his pockets. And he also had a second handgun on his person. So had intervention not occurred at that time and stopped him, the carnage would have continued. The incident lasted 10 minutes before the second armed police officer to arrive was able to shoot him and stop him. The first officer had arrived a minute or two prior. She engaged him, wounded him, distracted him and slowed him down, but she was herself shot and incapacitated. Two individuals in the victim population had the courage to charge Hassan with improvised weapons. They threw chairs, threw tables, attempted to tackle him. Both failed and were among those killed. In fact, deeper investigation will show you there were three people out of those 44 attempted to fight back and were terribly unsuccessful. And then the last key factor here is that U.S. military bases were at that time and very largely remain gun-free zones where no one carries personally owned weapons. Issued firearms are very seldom present and loaded and available for use, and only the military police are armed. The lessons learned that I want to extract from this event and discuss here are these. The lone extremist is quite capable of planning, preparing, and executing violent attacks with care and deliberation and precision. There were certain small elements of Major Hassan's attack at Fort Hood that show that in detail. He was motivated to kill American soldiers. In the course of his shooting, before anyone was effectively fighting back at him, there were several occasions where he walked past, considered, and intentionally chose not to shoot civilians and moved on to shoot other soldiers. He fought rather effectively against the first police officer who arrived and exchanged several shots with the second police officer. He had practiced intensively with the weapon that he had purchased prior to the event. Again, these were not the acts of an irrational or unprepared individual. Secondly, as we know, jihadism is a powerful motivation for individual acts of violence, and in particular in the spectrum of political and religious causes, because these individuals often have very little fear of their own death. Thirdly, the places where personal firearms are prohibited are extremely attractive targets, as we pointed out and will again. Unarmed resistance to an attacker who is armed and competent with his weapons is very unlikely to succeed, and that takes us, of course, immediately to the U.S. government's advice. Should you be caught up in an active shooter event that says you should run, and if you can't run, hide, and if you can't hide, then fight with your hands or with improvised weapons. All three methods proved singularly ineffective in this respect. Hassan continued shooting people with complete impunity for the greater part of 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, he went through 200 rounds, which, if you think about it, is actually a rather slow average rate of fire. And he kept at it until good people with guns arrived. 44 casualties in 10 minutes, and we have to ask ourselves how many might have been saved by armed resistance, which could have slowed him, distracted him, disrupted his activities or finally shut him down. But we will never know, because until the police officers arrived, there was no hope of his activities being stopped. Now let's take this discussion of an actual violent extremist event and take it to the next level, which is a hypothetical scenario that we'll walk through. Now, when we were here last week, I described these scenarios and how they're constructed and organized. And let me just cover that briefly again. This scenario is presented in a form very like to what we use in training as a tactical decision game, where we present a decision point or a series of decision points to you, the participant, giving you a certain amount of information related to the information that you might have if your feet were on the ground in the situation itself. And then we ask you to consider and come up in a rather short period of time with a course of action, and then describe that course of action and justify it to your fellow participants and to us as a starting point for discussion. Now, in this case, what we'll do is we'll walk through this scenario, and you will see that there are several decision points, which we could certainly do that exercise, but this forum is not particularly conducive to that. So I'm just going to walk you through this with a narrative description of how the day develops in a situation where you have shown up at the county courthouse to argue your position on a traffic ticket. The building you saw in the last photograph, and that you look now in an overhead rendering, it's a modern county courthouse complex in a suburban setting on the outskirts of a major city in North America. The main public entrance, which is circled in red on this slide, this is our area of interest. A recent security upgrade has restricted public access to the courtrooms, which is the shaded area of this floor plan. All public access to that area now goes through a security checkpoint in the lobby with a metal detector monitored by 2 armed deputies. The remainder of the building houses county administrative offices and is open to the public. The building security retrofit included tempered glass partitions and the locking of all exterior doors leading into the secure area, and channeling all traffic to and from that area through the security checkpoint in the lobby. Now, when we zoom in on the lobby, we see the location of the security checkpoint, which is the blue blocks flanking the blue arrow, and the glass partitions and locked doors that were part of the retrofit, further restricting access to the secured area. Here's a photograph of the actual lobby of that building in one direction. The long hall straight ahead of you in this view is now closed off by those glass security partitions, but this gives you an idea of the open architectural plan and the materials and the appearance of this structure. So now we'll take our diagram of the floor plan and we'll zoom in a little bit closer to focus upon the front entrance, the lobby, and the security checkpoint. And here you are. If you look at the lower left, you see a figure with a blue circle identifying him. That is you in this situation. You're barely on time for your court hearing on a potentially very expensive traffic ticket. As you come through the entry doors, you see the security checkpoint, and at that point, having not thought of this in advance, you realize that your permitted concealed handgun is not going to be allowed in the courtroom. And so you step to the side as you mentally process the fact that you're going to have to go back out to your car, secure your weapon, come back in, get online to go through security, which is going to make you late for your hearing, and this is shaping up to be a bad day. But as you're about to discover, it has the potential of being much worse. Two men dressed in black, wearing heavy clothes and ski masks, burst through the front doors yelling Allah Akbar, as did Major Hassan, as they opened fire with, respectively, a handgun and a Kalashnikov rifle with a large drum magazine. They're moving toward the security checkpoint. The attackers scan left and right, and for a brief moment you make eye contact with the handgunner, the attacker on the left, but he ignores you and continues moving towards the checkpoint. The civilians begin to scatter, screaming. You turn and run, as you see by the blue arrow. You turn and run to the hallway entrance to the administrative wing. You're not fighting at this point. Your weapon has not been revealed. You couldn't shoot effectively moving backwards if you tried, so you're heading to a position of advantage and cover as fast as you can. You have many decisions to make, but this is the first and most self-evident one. The attackers continue to move forward, shooting. Those closest to the attackers are hit and fall to the floor. Reaching the corner, you turn. This is your first decision point. Do you continue to run, or do you consider intervening in this situation? And for our purposes, we'll say you reach that corner, you turn, and you draw your Glock 19 handgun from concealment. Out on the floor, the rifleman directs long bursts of automatic fire through the tempered glass barriers on either side of the metal detector, and both of the deputies take multiple hits and go down before they can even bring their sidearms into play. They're out of the fight, and we are less than 10 seconds into this incident. The attackers continue moving towards the security checkpoint. The guards are down. All of the civilians that were in front of them are dead or wounded on the floor in front of them or fleeing up the hall. The range to these two attackers is 12 to 15 yards, but the corner offers you a degree of cover. The adversaries are focused upon moving forward through the security checkpoint, and they appear to be unaware of your presence. There's no one on their feet in the vicinity of the attackers. So you take an extra fraction of a second to brace your grip against the wall to ensure a good sight picture, and you fire a quick controlled pair, two aimed rounds at the nearest target, and then you shift to the farther target and do the same. The first target falls to the floor. The second target, although you're confident that you got hits, the first target merely stumbles and then turns toward you. There's what he looks like. And your reasonable conclusion, based upon your training, is that if you've got two solid center of mass hits on an individual with your 9mm handgun at this range, and he has taken no apparent damage, he may very well be wearing body armor. So you lower your sights to the attacker's groin area, you'll fire two more aimed rounds, and he falls to the floor, dropping his rifle. At this point, 6 civilians, 2 deputies, and both attackers are now down. Whether they're dead or merely wounded, you're not sure. And remember now, we are perhaps approaching the 20-second mark since the beginning of this incident. You hear voices and movement behind you in the hall to the administrative wing. You hear sirens approaching from several directions. You look out through the glass front of the building and the entrance, and you see light bars flashing as police units begin to arrive on the street outside the front entrance. This is a amazingly fast police response, you will probably notice, but you're at the county courthouse and you are very, very close to police response. Understanding that police responders are seconds away from the scene, there are several things that you know you cannot do, although you would very much like to, and that is You cannot keep a weapon in your hands. You cannot check the wounded. You cannot move forward and disarm the attackers or make their weapons safe. What you do is you holster your weapon. You ensure that it is concealed. You stand up with your hands over your head, prepared to follow all instructions of responding officers, but your eyes never leave the downed attackers whose status you do not know. Now, that was a very, very brief scenario. And where we're going to go from here is to discuss what individual skills and abilities enabled you, the participant in this situation, to resolve it, minimizing injuries, property damage, and the further potential of these attackers to the extent that you did. What we at Pulse do is we offer training in all of these skills and all of the underlying concepts to help you meet a crisis of this nature, solve it successfully, safely, and within the law. And with that, I would like to turn over control to Ron, who is going to talk more specifically about the skills applicable in this situation and how Pulse addresses and trains those skills. So,
okay, thank you, Bill. And I will now hand off control to Ron. Ron, you should be hot, ready to go.
Right, can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. There we go. I think we're good. As Bill had described in both the historic example as well as in the hypothetical, there were certain aspects to the individual's performance that helped assure a success in both of those scenarios. One, the police officer in the real-life Fort Hood shooting, as also Bill described, the first responder there, the first officer, helped to actually delay and disrupt the plans, got the second one there. And then in our scenario, the hypothetical as well, this can really be summed up in an individual's success being confident in his application of individual skills under realistic circumstances. And what we talk about there in the confidence is, if you have confidence, you're able to make better decisions because you're more capable at that time of thinking with the forebrain. Under a high-stress scenario, such as a gunfight, we get that what we call sympathetic nervous system response, which is the body's natural reaction. You've probably heard that referred to as fight or flight, which can have a number of detrimental effects if it's taken too far, and without training it usually is. And one of those is instead of thinking with our forebrain, where we're able to actually work through problems, we start thinking with our mammalian survivalist brain, our midbrain. And that prevents you from thinking clearly. So that confidence comes through that training, having seen those scenarios, having worked through scenarios like that in the past, gives your mind something it can latch onto, the successful completion of those types of scenarios. Those individual skills we talk about are things that are included, like gun handling techniques, where we talk about obviously marksmanship, your malfunction clearances, reloads for your handgun rifle, your shotgun, the techniques that are used to employ them, how we string those techniques together to give us better tactics, and the procedures we use along the way. And as I mentioned previously, these have to be taught under realistic circumstances as possible, and that usually comes down to what we call reality-based training, where we take you and we put you up against another live, breathing human being who is shooting live simulated munitions at you that are painful but don't induce death. And what this reality-based training scenarios do for you is that they give you stress inoculation, which is not the same as stress proofing. It's the concept here is getting used to something, seeing it over and over, and learning to operate underneath that stress. It doesn't mean stress won't enter. As inoculation against a disease doesn't mean the disease won't enter. It just means that the body knows what to do with that disease once it does. And much like that, the reality-based training under stress teaches you how to learn what that violence looks and feels like, and by repeatedly, successfully completing those scenarios, it does build that confidence, which reduces the fear and allows you to make those better decisions. So kind of keep that in mind at the top of your head with the other individual skills we're about to talk about. The reality-based training also enables what they call, we call violence enabling, but it's killing enabling, flipping the switch, which is knowing when to use that lethal force option, when it's needed. And when it's needed, it's needed pretty badly. And again, the more you see these scenarios, the more you're able to work within them, the more confidence you build. Also, part of this is expanding your connectivity with your environment, finding friends, acquaintances that feel the same way you do, whether it's in your workplace, your home, your church, your school, or in your community, and learning how to work with others, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's talk about some of these key actions that the hypothetical scenario gave us. And so the first is effective concealment and carrying that weapon so it's not seen. So the first part of that is having it with you when you need it. Fortunately, in this scenario, you didn't make it back to your vehicle before the bad thing went down to disarm yourself, and you had it on you. We're not going to belabor the victim zones, gun-free zones, but that's kind of the idea there. If you need it badly, and it needs to be with you. Unfortunately, a lot of people will not carry because it's even uncomfortable. The next part of that is not being seen as a threat because that firearm is concealed. You'll notice in that scenario, and it's not that scenario, much like the Fort Hood incident, allowed you as the concealed carrier to be bypassed because you weren't seen as the immediate threat, which was the deputies in front of them manning that checkpoint. And the next thing you want to consider is fight or flee. That's kind of a big one. The next decision he had to make was deciding whether he was going to stay there or get out. And kind of the things to remember there is you are under no obligation, legal obligation or otherwise, to stay and fight. Police are under the same. Courts have found that police have no obligation to stay and protect you. It's going to be their best decision, and you need to make that decision as well for yourself in that particular situation. And part of that there, we've already touched on, fight or flee, is when you decide you're going to fight, it has to be an all-out thing. And what I mean by that is you need to be able to instantly and ruthlessly kill your adversary. And that's what we call flipping the switch, is when you realize at that moment going from someone who can be negotiated with, someone who can be talked down, is that time is over, which obviously it was in the very beginning of that situation, and then being able to actually press that trigger on another live human being, which a lot of people take for granted. They think it can happen, but one of the more difficult decisions to make in life is to actually be able to press that trigger on a real live human being. Another thing you saw in this scenario was a maneuvering to a position that offered cover and concealment. And cover and concealment, not going to get into this too deep, but there is a difference. Cover is actually going to stop incoming projectiles from hitting you in that courtroom scenario. Most public offices have plenty of steel, stonework in there, polished marble, etc. In the scenario, you were able to take that cover and get someplace that could have prevented rounds from coming into you. Concealment, on the other hand, conversely, is something that will hide you from being shot, which is better than nothing, infinitely better than nothing. But it will always be nice to, that concealment won't prevent that round, so it's always nice to have that cover there, something you can do to actually stop those rounds from coming into you. And then you using that cover appropriately, whether that means helping you stabilize your position or getting back far enough from it so you're not exposed to the incoming shrapnel that might be ricocheting off of that structure you might be trying to use. The next thing you saw was, as he was back behind that cover in the scenario, he was able to employ a flanking technique, which means he was using the elements of surprise, speed, and his violence of action from afar, in this case almost directly behind the adversaries, where you get that surprise, to do his work that he needed to accomplish without being in that direct line of fire. So as they are also amped up and they are experiencing those same emotions and fears that the average person would, and their focus is more forward on the problem at hand, that allows you in the background, in the periphery, on that flank to initiate an attack. Next was you had a very chaotic environment. You had multiple targets, and what you needed to be able to do at that point was have some target discrimination, which comes from our safety habits. And one of those safety habits is not just knowing the individual that you need to identify and take out, but it's also being aware of who may be beyond your adversary should you achieve over-penetration. That round keeps going. Or if somebody coming in between you and your adversary that does not need to be shot. It's a chaotic environment. People are running everywhere. So you need to have that target discrimination, be able to select those targets, and then eliminate them ruthlessly. In that scenario also, we experienced a failure to stop, which means that the attacker didn't go down. We expected to shoot him to the ground. We started shooting. His one friend goes down. He doesn't go down. And as Bill mentioned, with the right training, you kind of come to see what that looks like and the appropriate response, which is a failure to stop drill. You in that situation went with a pelvic girdle down low to drop him. And then once that situation was resolved, you need to be very cognizant. Another key action you need to be aware of is everything that's going on now. We're going to have that police response. You're probably going to need to stow that gun immediately. You're going to have to stay behind cover, keep your eyes on the adversaries. You're going to have to show those empty hands, and you're going to have to cooperate and communicate with the law enforcement that's on the scene there. Fortunately, you're at a courthouse. There should be a lot of them available and around you rather quickly. So there's a lot of small key actions that go in to make that scenario successful, and the takeaway here is the real idea, the real key here is having that kind of training that allows you to make those decisions at the right time, because they don't just come up all on their own and resolve themselves. You have to have that training. So coming to bringing that to a conclusion, we talked earlier about expanding your connectivity with your environment, your networking with the idea of networking with the law enforcement to ensure smooth operations between yourself and the law enforcement community. And we actually have, with our training programs, what we call the Intent to Defend package. And I'm going to hand that over to Bill and let him take it from here.
I'm just going to speak briefly on this because thus far our scenarios, including today's scenario, are relatively tame, relatively simple, involve one citizen as a shooter in an unanticipated situation in a public environment. So the portion of our Intent to Defend protocol that applies is exactly what you saw in the scenario narrative and what Ron just talked about, and that is based upon the certainty that when police officers arrive at a reported shooting event, they are understandably and quite rightfully likely to perceive any individual that they see with a weapon in their hand as a threat to themselves and others, and therefore as a shooter involved in a shooting incident, you must be very, very cognizant of that, and it is not advisable in any way whatsoever that when the police officers arrive on scene, they find you with people wounded or dead on the ground and you with a weapon in your hand. So securing that weapon, either reholstering it, laying it down, and moving away from it is going to ensure your safety and make the job of responding law enforcement a great deal easier. The other aspect of that is that if you find yourself taking action in a situation like this and you are successful, then you have taken on a great deal of responsibility, and you have ended up, if you were successful, in substantial control of the situation. And you must be mentally and emotionally prepared to relinquish that control immediately when law enforcement arrives. Follow their instructions. Expect to be treated as a suspect, at least in the first moments of their response and size up of the situation. Now, later on in this webinar series, when we start talking about operating as teams and operating in a planned and organized fashion in defense of a fixed location, we're going to take this intent to defend protocol and develop it quite a bit further and discuss the ways in which you can further ensure everyone's safety by coordinating in advance with law enforcement. But in this scenario, it's really rather simpler, and it all comes down to what you as a participant of the situation must do to ensure your own safety in the immediate aftermath. So, Mike?
Very good. Thank you, Bill. Bill, can you hear me? I assume I'm on.
Yes.
Okay, that wraps up today's content. Let me close this out by a couple of other quick points here. Everybody on the webinar today gets a free 2-week trial in the O2DA Defense Academy. Inside the Academy is where you will find the webinar replays along with all the PDF versions of the documents discussed today. That would be the strategy manual and the intent to defend protocol. Also, all of the tactics and techniques that Ron talks about are further explained inside the Academy via videos, manual extracts, photos, and other resources. So those are also pointed out for you inside of the Defense Academy. And just to quickly show you how to sign up for your free trial to get access to these materials, you can either click the link over here in the chat box, or you will receive an email from us first thing tomorrow morning that will have the link to sign up. Once you have that link, you go ahead, click on that link. It will bring you to this page here where you can go ahead and sign up for the free trial. You don't need a credit card to do that. All you do is select a name, a username, a password, and put in an email address, and you're good to go. You're inside the Defense Academy after doing that. And then once inside, you click on your profile tab, and that will take you over to your individual profile where you will find a groups tab. You click on groups, and you will automatically be populated into the Defending Your Homeland group, and this is where you will be able to find the webinar replays along with the files that have been archived up to that point, along with other events, activities, and things that I believe you will find of interest. And once again, everything that we've talked about here today, from the standpoint of further explanation, you will find inside of the Defense Academy, whether it be in the videos, manuals, or various photos and narrative extracts. So all of that you will find inside of the Defense Academy. So that email will go out tomorrow, and along with the replay of the webinar today, that will be up tomorrow also. I would encourage you to share the webinar series with any of your friends, business associates, church colleagues, school colleagues. Hopefully they will find value in it the way you do. If you have any questions about how you shared it, all you have to do is just give them the link that you use to sign up to the webinar, or just send us an email. We'll be happy to get contact with them. So with that, I will go ahead and open it up for questions. Once again, the questions can be typed in the question box at the lower right-hand corner of your control panel. And let's see, there's... Okay, first question up here is, want to know how to talk to Leo after an incident. Inside of the, I believe it's the individual tactics manual, we do have a fair amount of content relative to the process that you should follow after a shooting in order to talk to law enforcement. Ron, I don't know if you want to add any more to that, Ron, but there is a fair amount of content that's covered inside the individual tactics manual when it comes to how to interface with law enforcement after an incident. Ron, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would throw in there the intent to defend as well. Part of this process, folks, is the bonding process with your local law enforcement officials, getting to know them, getting to work with them, getting to let them know who you are, that you are one of the good guys, and that's a powerful tool in there as well. But as Mike said, a lot of that is covered in the tactics manual, and then the intent to defend will finish that off.
Okay, other questions? I will hold it open another 15 seconds if you have a question to, here we go, another question in here. Okay, the webinar replay is in the Homeland Defense group. So you'll need to make sure that you're actually in the Homeland Defense group. And if the replay doesn't work inside of your group, which it may not in some operating systems, all you have to do is hit the YouTube. There's a YouTube video link there. Hit the YouTube video link and it should open up in a YouTube video window and you should be able to view it there. But again, make sure you are in the Homeland, defending your Homeland group. There are several groups out there, and so it's important to make sure that you are in that group. And if you're signing up for the free trial, you will automatically be put into the Defending Your Homeland webinar group. Okay, I'll hold it open another 15 seconds for any other questions. Okay, let's see. Rich, I will talk to you offline about that, how to get into it from your existing membership. Okay, 10 more seconds and I will shut it down. Thank you for attending. Same time, same place next week. And as I indicated, everybody here will get a follow-up email with the directions on how to get into the Defense Academy. If you're already in, you don't need to do anything else. You'll be able to access today's webinar, the slides with today's webinar, along with the other links inside the defense group tomorrow. Thank you for attending, and stay safe.